Now, I'm with my very dear friend, Dr. Samantha Graham, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a minute, Sam, but briefly, Sam and I met, it's about 30 years ago now, Sam. We were studying for an MSc in human ecology. Rather typically, my decision was made the week before the course started. Sam's, you had a bit more of a strategic approach, I think. And it was an extraordinary year, and we've been in touch for 30 years since. I saw you very briefly, I'm just share an anecdote. Saw you very briefly a couple of years ago, and it kind of highlights, I think, the fact that you walk the talk with the work we're going to be talking about today. I really think, you embody the work, I think. So Sam's family lives in Sydney. She was on Iona, an island off Scotland, for a holiday, and I took my daughter across to meet up with her. And there was a day Sam was with her mother, her husband, her brother, in-laws and son, and walked into a beautiful building, lovely sunny day, and they just looked at each other and sat in a circle and had a shared moment. Meanwhile, I had got my accommodation booked, muddling, and was sleeping in a tent with my daughter. Just, to me, it kind of highlights our different approach, and why, I think probably why we are good friends, because we complement each other. And at the core of it all, our heart is in a very similar place. Sam, would you just start by giving a little bit of a background about the work that you do and how you got there?
Love to. Thank you, Mariana. It's a delight to be chatting with you. And you actually, just to start, were an inspiration to me in getting your PhD. I followed in your footsteps. Yes, similarities there for sure. Look, my little company is called State of Mind, and I work with mainly corporate teams. It's leadership development, but also my not-for-profit is motor neuron disease, a not-for-profit up in Queensland called MND and Me. But my main focus is giving people tools, really simple science-based tools to help them thrive rather than just survive. And in these testing times, finding that they're in more and more demand. So they're science-based. They basically give people in the moment ways of becoming present, and ultimately with some practice, becoming more resilient and more able to notice the narratives in our heads, more able to press the pause button. And you'll notice I'm using these expressions like press the pause button. Another one is beware the amygdala hijack. So there are all these little terms which are a language that I use in my programs to help people be able to, in the spur of the moment, at the heat of an upset, remember and remind themselves, 3 body breaths. I can do that right now. So sorry, I've dropped into the content of it because I love it so much, but it's that sort of work where I work in the room with either coherent teams or open workshops or sometimes football teams, and help them perform at a higher level by being able to build that muscle with them. And the footy players really understand this, build that muscle so they can think about what they're thinking about. And then we look at the science behind, well, what's going on in our body when we're ongoingly and constantly stressed and anxious and worried, and that we need to let our autonomic nervous system recuperate in between this crazy life where we're running from one thing to the next. That's a broad overview, Mariana.
We'll dive deeper, because today we were talking about presence from person to planet, and I think we met because of our concerns for planet, and it feels nice to kind of link this work from the person to a broader context. You were talking about this suite of 22 tools that you have that you use in the corporate world and the sport and on the sports field. I love the metaphor that you shared with me about roll up the scroll. Do you tell us a bit more about that? Because I think that's just such a handy way to remind us to be present?
It's a real visual, isn't it? I love it. So I was reading, I spent a lot of time reading and actually going to workshops with Eckhart Tolle, and in one of his books, The Power of Now, and also A New Earth, he talked about this scroll, and the sacred scroll that our lives are written on. And if we unroll it in the direction of the past, we can see everything that's created us, that's affected us. And then if we unroll it further into the future, we don't know what's written there. These are things to come. But if we roll up the scroll, as I call this tool, then there's a panel which is the present moment, and it's only in that panel that we are experiencing life. Because if we're in the past and we've disappeared, unfurled the scroll and disappeared into the past, that's useful. But the only way we can get to the past is through thinking. And we can think back and reflect, how was this quarter as a coach? How many clients did I have? Did I do a good job? And that reflection is really valuable. And then we roll up the scroll consciously. But I think we all know people who just disappear into the past. Either it was a better time and we wish it was still there, or it was a horrible time and we can't bring ourselves past it. We keep deferring back to that past conditioning. So the invitation is to roll up the scroll. And equally, we know people who, many of us, are disappearing into the future. We're constantly planning, wishing for COVID to disappear. We, in the old days, we would plan our next holiday, or when we got that next raise, or that next job, or that next car, or whatever it was. And so to notice that we've gone into the future, and sure, we can go into the future and imagine and thereby create the future we want, but we don't create it from that forward thinking. We have to roll the scroll back up and drop into the present moment. And it's the quality of the consciousness that we bring to that present moment that will create a future that's either desirable or not desirable. I'm going to take a sip of my water.
I think I'd like to broaden this conversation out and just see if people are listening in live. Just use the comments to kind of give us some ideas about what you do to roll up the scroll, how you might stay present and why it's important to you. I think that the forward one, I hear it in a lot of clients, because they're kind of, yes, I'm really busy now, but as if things are going to suddenly miraculously change tomorrow, or well, my classic is I'm going to go on a fitness kick, and there's always some point in the future, or we offset the present. My daughter's got a big school test today, so it's can't wait till that's over. We kind of, rather than just notice what's going on right now.
Yeah. And we can treat that present moment like a doormat. We don't notice it. We just want to wipe our feet on it and step over it. So
I know that we were going to share a few things at the end. Is there anything now that's appropriate to share that might help people, or should we talk about collective presence? Sorry, I have a question. Sorry.
Go on. Yes, do.
When you're talking about roll up the scroll, do you suggest people just keep that frame in mind, or how might we actually do that?
It's a great question. So I worked with a football team. Can I talk about this,
Please
this
do.
collective? Yeah. So the football team happened to belong to Russell Crowe, and they're called the Rabbitohs. And
I love the fact that you just dropped that in.
It's hilarious. I mean, it makes me laugh. So they hadn't won the premiership. This is rugby league, for 43 years. And we had the privilege of giving them some mind tools. And they happened to win it that year. So we felt very like that was purely us, of course. We took full credit, which the coach did not give us. But one of the tools that the guys loved, and you can actually see them talking about it on my website, they're talking about if they've just dropped the ball, or if they've let a try in, or they've stuffed up in some way, or the ref has done a bad call, they can get caught up in that. What's only a minute ago, even if it's just a minute ago, that's not where they want to be. They could, before we worked with them, they realized that they could get caught up with that for 15 or 20 minutes. Their minds were still thinking about what they just had done, and they couldn't undo it, obviously. So for them, a lot of them, they would visualize, roll up the scroll, present, and they would have a cue word to bring them into the present moment. And it would depend what their job was. If it was kick long, run hard, tackle hard, whatever it was, they would use a verbal cue to right after they'd rolled up the scroll in their minds to take them into that next action. So I think there's something to be said, we're talking about this spectrum from personal presence and practicing with that muscle of being able to show up for whatever's going on, and then doing these collective practices where we're inviting each other to become present again. And I think as coaches, that's what we're doing, and that's potentially what we're practicing is what's going on right here and right now. And collectively, the footy players, St Kilda AFL team as well, would call each other back to the game. So they would see in each other that they had wandered off. And in AFL, in the Aussie rules, Aussie football, they call it floating. And you can see it on TV, you can see it from the stadium. Oh, this guy's floating. And what we unpacked when we did these group conversations with them was the narrative is actually, for God's sake, don't pass me the ball, don't pass me the ball. I just dropped it a minute ago. I just want to die, and I just want to be sucked up into a hole and not be here. And you can see that in their behavior because they start floating and sort of moving away from where the action is. So their colleagues, their buddies they learned to notice when that was going on and basically call that player back into the game, into the moment. Let it go, that's gone. We're here now. So that, yeah, it's a nice example in the sporting arena of collective presence and helping each other back to the present moment, so you can be most effective. If we're thinking, we're not living, we're not in the moment and creating.
I love that. I'm wondering if anyone has anyone listening might have any thoughts about how they've noticed that in the corporate world as well, that call back to the game. I hear it with clients sometimes that I don't know how to deal with this person, and it actually, they're just cruising along, they're doing whatever, and it's floating, isn't it? They've distanced themselves because they're not, I don't know, for whatever reason, but how can we call people back to the game?
Yes, and in the corporate world, you can float for ages. You could float for a day or two and just have a lids on pen kind of day. Whereas in a football game, 80 minutes, if you're not on for all 80 minutes, you're taken off. So I think in the corporate world, when I work with teams, they do start to use language to call each other back to the present moment as well. Yeah.
How does sorry, I've gone off piste a little bit, but I'm curious about this and how the timescales differ. So you're talking about the game being a short window of time and every second counts. I'm wondering how, when I have a few clients that work in the public sector, in the civil service, where it's changing, but there is a view of kind of job for life still in some of those sectors. So they get increasingly fed up with so-and-so person who is lids on pen pretty much for the last 20 years of their career. When there's less of a sense of urgency for some people, I wonder how we might do it. Because I'm thinking aloud, sorry, Sam. Some of your ideas, some of this work can seem a bit woo-woo, a bit out there. And yet, you've had successful engagements with rugby teams and people that dispel that stereotype of what this work might be. I'm just wondering how we might get the urgency across for the job for life, got a lid on pen for the last 20 years of career people, or those that are working with them, how they might call them back to the game.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I don't know. Sure. I'm not expecting you to come up with the answers. It's a wondering.
It's a wondering. Yeah, I mean, we can only be responsible for our response to
that's it,
these
isn't
people.
It? That's it. Yeah. It's the roll up the scroll. What's my role in this right now?
What's my role in this? Yeah, and we can only model the behaviour we might like to see amongst others, enacted by others. But at the end of the day, if that sort of workplace is driving us crazy, I guess one of the questions is, do I want to continue here? Or, how can I perform at my best when I feel all these people around me they're only half here? When I was back at Qantas, as a graduate management trainee, we used the term dead wood, and they were literally people just hanging on until their superannuation kicked in, etc. And it can be very, very, very frustrating. And that's when we turn the mirror on ourselves and go, okay, why is this upsetting me so much? Can I not get my job done? Or how can I continue to do my job at a high level? And then you start to get creative and you have to do workarounds, etc., I guess.
This feeling of responsibility and taking personal responsibility and remembering our role in it's leading me to think about our unfolding ecological catastrophe, Sam, and that's one of the things that how we met really because of our concerns about that. And you have you've got a theory about what's underlying some of this.
Yeah, I guess I think of it as a spectrum of being present in our bodies, being present in our households, being present in the communities and the workplaces where we work in, and then being present in this planetary crisis that we're going through, ecological. Australia's being a pariah in terms of carbon and just environmental destruction globally, etc. And just to say, I think that the stress and anxiety and worry that we're feeling in the corporate sector is amplified by this existential worry, this existential crisis that a lot of us are picking up on, whether we're adults and we can't get our elected representatives to do what we'd like them to do, or we've got kids, young teenagers, and they're thinking, well, what future is there? What have you done to the planet for me? And I guess part of my thesis is that we have outsourced care, and we have the economic system, for instance, says, look, they're just externalities. We can keep digging and digging stuff out of the ground, making stuff and putting the waste in a big hole, that linear model of production and consumption, and we can keep on consuming. But actually care has been allocated to mainly women. And it's whether it's childcare, whether it's early schooling, whether it's nursing, whether it's end of life care, we don't value it, and we've outsourced it. And I think that outsourcing of care and what's seen as women's activities, the undervaluing of it, is needing to be redressed now. And so we come back to the start of the spectrum and we go, right, as a man or a woman, am I caring for myself? Am I I speak from personal experience, going to the toilet when I darn well need to go to the toilet? Am I eating good, healthy food when I need to eat good, healthy food? This looking after ourselves and our own health and well-being in this little unit here, and then those around us. One of the big things I'm very keen on is in our households, where women are working as much as men often, are the women still being asked to do the cooking, the cleaning, the childcare, the chief operating officer role in the home?
Yeah.
The mental load, yeah. And statistically, it looks like we still are. So, if people are looking to do things differently along that spectrum, I think the place to start is with our own bodies, and then in that domestic scenario where we can actually fess up and say, oh yeah, I could probably do a little more. Maybe I could cook two dinners each week, or be more across the kids' sporting activities, or know the teachers' names, or those things that we tend to carry, that get pushed aside. It's women's work. Well,
I'm not good at that stuff.
You're not?
No.
Oh, I'm not good at. Yeah, I
You've
see
been
what you
told
mean.
that. I'm not good at that stuff. You're so good at that stuff. I'm not good at that stuff.
Practice. You could practice.
Try harder.
Yeah, try. There we go. Yeah. So there's a gender element in there for sure.
Yeah. And, you were talking to me as well about the impact of this unconditional bias that we carry. I got a big question then. So how can we be present to the planet? How can we be present beyond ourselves even?
Yeah. We really do, I feel, have to start with literally being in our own bodies and not just up here in our heads. So dropping into the body. And I've been doing some work with a woman who practices somatic experiencing, and it's really very much about getting ourselves into our bodies in the felt experience of whatever's going on in that moment. you just drop into whatever is there and then in your body. I think that's the starting place for redressing this. And of course, we can start to notice the narratives in our minds when we drop in there. We can see them more clearly, is my feeling. And that subconscious bias that you just talked about is becomes more apparent to us when we're very calm. Our autonomic nervous system, we're just letting it go. Okay, I'm going to stop running, stop racing, stop my harried mind. And actually then we can start to see some of the thoughts that aren't so helpful to us, and some of the practices, the grabbing the bag of chips as we run out the door to meet the school bus, or those things that we do in a hurry. I feel like these very simple practices, for example, 3 body breaths. So this is one that I would I do regularly and I offer it in all my workshops. It's one of the 22, and it's just you stop and you notice where you notice your breath.
Should we do it now?
So I'd love to do that with you. Yeah. So
I'm moving my chair.
Yeah, it's really about putting your attention on where you feel your breath. So you can do it eyes open or eyes closed, and take 3 breaths, and I'll talk you through it as you do that. And I'll just take one myself. And you can just notice whether you notice the chest, abdomen rising and falling, or you might notice the breath coming in and out through the nose. Or the third place you might feel it is on the back of the throat. And you just notice the breath. And do that for even a minute. Literally 3 breaths is all it takes. How did that feel, Mariana?
Noticed it in my belly. I've been doing a lot of work in this area because I've become acutely aware that I lived here.
Yeah.
And increasingly so by working on Zoom as well, really up here. And actually, in order to coach my clients, I've actually had to really make a conscious practice of breathing deep and changing my body. And actually, I almost hold myself to remind myself to really breathe down. And so I think that's why that was the most natural place for me to feel that breath.
Yes. Lovely. The other type of breathing we talk about is vagus breathing, and vagus is when you breathe. Nerve. That's it. And the vagus nerve is physically rubbed by the diaphragm going up and down. It runs through the diaphragm. So when we breathe nice and deeply, instead of shallowly just up here, nice and deeply, the diaphragm goes up and down and physically rubs the vagus nerve. You probably all know this. And it sends out the endorphins. And it says, I can deal with this.
There's something about, and I don't know, this will be turned into a podcast, so we may have people that aren't within the group listening. So a bit of explanation perhaps might be useful, because my understanding of the vagus nerve is there's been some research that when we talk about gut instincts, that the vagus nerve is a real a connector between our brain and our gut, from kind of develops early on as when we're fetal, and it's this intuitive string that links head and gut.
And it runs past all the major organs and sends information back up to the brain as well as down. It's like a superhighway. Yeah,
I love that idea of massaging it.
Yes, right. Yeah.
As coaches, we're encouraged to work with intuition, but to kind of check it out, so that we're not it's an offering. It's I'm wondering if you might be, or I'm getting a feeling in my gut about this. What does that tell you if I say I've got this feeling? Is there anything that comes up for you? It's kind of done in that way rather than an assumption, because we might be wrong, or actually our clients might not be ready to hear it, and either way is fine.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
just that we're just tapping into our own stuff and
Yeah.
sharing it in that way.
Yeah, lovely, beautiful.
So a deep breath can help. What other practices might help us be present to the planet? Anything else that you can think of that might be useful to share?
Look, I've two things to say. When we do that breathing deeply, and when we meditate, and when we sleep well, we're potentially dropping into the theta delta brainwave state. And that's where that intuition and that, I would almost say, inner guidance comes from, when we drop into theta delta. And only you can know how you'd want to show up in terms of doing your part for the planet. You know, there's what you can do for your own body and state of mind and resilience and sense of self. And then there's what you can do for your family or in your household, you know. And then I think meditating or honestly just sleeping well, which so few of my clients do. Oh my goodness.
And increasingly I don't do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, menopause doesn't help. Don't start me on that.
That's exactly it, you know.
But intuiting what is my role in planetary restoration. And I for one have just started in Australia, we've got Voices of Bradfield is my example. It's an electorate that I live in, and we're working to wake up our local electorate to what needs to change in Australian politics, so that we can address climate change, so that we can address corruption in government, all of these things. So, and that's just in my sweet spot right now. I feel like I found my calling in terms of that big picture work that I do on the side, alongside running my business and looking after the household and looking after myself. You know, I sort of think of it in those concentric circles. Yeah.
I'm conscious of our time, and we're coming to the end of our time today. And I guess the questions coming up about the theme for this International Coaching Week is defying challenging times. And I guess there's just a thing about what should we do if we're feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think defy the cultural norm of pushing through, of just going faster and faster. And in doing that, by taking breaks, the tool I have is called Cherish the Gaps. Create gaps between clients, create gaps throughout your day. So create gaps, slow down, drop into the breath, take the dog for a walk, all of those tiny little things that slow us down and almost defy the status quo. It depends if you're in a big city and you work for a large corporation, or you're doing a lot of coaching back to back to back. You'll know this busy beta, high adrenaline, high cortisol state better than some of us who might be self-employed and have dropped it down a couple of gears. But most of us have had that experience of just running too fast and too hard. So for me, the word defy relates to defy that that status quo and just choose your own time and pace. And then from that present moment, you get so much more done. The quality of what you're bringing is so much higher. And in that way, we can defy the challenging times.
Yeah. And I'm getting a real mental roll up the scroll, you know, reconnect, do those 3 breaths. Remember who you are right there, right now.
Yes.
Sam, thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a joy. I'm going to end the meeting now, and I'll see you back in Zoom in a second.
Thank you.